Hi, I'm Josh Hutchinson, and she's Sarah Jack, and this is Witch Hunt Podcast.
Welcome back to our special series for Podcasthon 2025, Ending Witch Hunts, where podcasters are uniting for good and impact. 1,500 or more podcasters have been releasing special episodes March 15th through the 21st. They've used their platforms to simultaneously amplify causes and important charities. Learn more at podcasthon.org, and you will see our nonprofit and witch hunts featured with the other charities.
This is episode 5 in our Ending Witch Hunts series, and we'll have the final installment for you tomorrow.
Our true story about witch hunts has taken us through Africa, Papua New Guinea, and parts of Asia, particularly India. Now we turn our attention to Europe, where many of the historical witch trials that shaped our modern understanding took place.
Yeah, in this episode, we'll be exploring several European countries, including England, Scotland, Ireland, Italy, Germany, France, and Portugal. And we'll cover Switzerland and Austria in future discussions.
Understanding these historical trials gives us important context for recognizing harmful practices and accusations that still occur today.
By connecting past and present, we gain a more complete picture of how witch hunt dynamics persist across cultures and time. Let's dig in.
Europe's witch trials peaked from about 1400 to 1775, a period during which 40 to 50,000 innocent people were executed for witchcraft.
While witch trials were held in just about every European country, about half of the executions occurred in the Holy Roman Empire, where the bodies of those convicted of witchcraft were burned at the stake.
Bodies were also burned in Scotland, which we visited with Mary W. Craig, author of 2 good books. Please grab these and add them to your library if you don't have them books, Borders Witch Hunt and Agnes Finney, The Witch of Potterrow-Port.
Mary taught us how brutal witch trials were, especially about the torture inflicted upon victims. In our episode with her, we also first learned about witch prickers, or witch broders, whose job was to prick marks and blemishes on suspects' bodies with large needles. And if they found a mark that was insensitive and did not bleed when pricked, it was considered to be a witch's mark or teat. And these were generally located in the genital region.
The theme of witch pricker is central to a play named Prick. We discussed this play with the creators. And at Witch Hunt Podcast, we love the arts and we love bringing on guests who are using the arts to look at the true nature of humanity, especially through the perspective of witch hunts. So please check out our episode on Prick.
On the podcast, our very first foray into European witch trials came in episode number 6, when we spoke with Dr. Danny Buck about the witch trials in Great Yarmouth, England, during Matthew Hopkins' reign of terror.
We ventured back to England in episode 11 when we talked to Professor Marion Gibson about her book, The Witches of St. Osoph.
Professor Gibson taught us the importance of recovering the individual identities of those involved in witch trials in order to understand their motivations, to humanize them, and to give those who were accused of witchcraft an identity as a person other than a witch.
And if you've listened to our second episode in the series, Dr. Leo Igwe talked about one of the stories of a modern survivor, the survivor that Leo spoke about. She wasn't a witch, when she walked into that community to talk about it. She was a survivor.
This lesson from Marion Gibson about the importance of humanizing the individuals involved. They're not just characters. They're not just notes in some history book. They're actual human beings with the same motivations, wants, and desires that we have. And it's important to cast them in that light and not remember them as witches, which they absolutely were not. And Dr. Leo Igwe reminded us of why that's so important when he spoke in the second episode in this series when we were discussing Africa. He told us a story that a survivor told him about her experience being accused of witchcraft as a child and how that continued to affect her into adult life. And those kinds of stories that really show you it's human beings that are involved, whether it was 600 years ago or yesterday, that's a human being that's being accused of a crime that human beings don't commit and that they specifically had no intention of committing.
When journalist Karen Helmstead visited Witch Hunt Podcast, she talked about her ancestor who was executed for witchcraft in what is now Germany.
She also discussed the brutal nature of witch hunts, emphasizing the overriding drive for confessions, which were seen as the ultimate evidence on which to convict a person of witchcraft. This overriding drive for confessions gave rise to the extensive use of torture in many jurisdictions in the Holy Roman Empire and throughout Europe.
We also got to go to Italy with Dr. Deborah Moretti. On her first visit to the podcast, she discussed two main perceptions of a witch in Italy during the early modern period, something that is true of other areas that have seen witch hunts as well.
Yeah, these two perceived types of witches are the supernatural witch and the practical witch. In the supernatural view of witchcraft, the witch flew to Sabbaths and copulated with the devil, did other just what were thought of as despicable, the most despicable acts that you could think of, anti woman, anti mother acts, anti Christian acts, inverting the Christian rights, flipping them on their head to serve the devil. So there's that view. And then there's just the practical view in which witches are pretty much ordinary people who live next to you and they happen to possess the ability to use magic, which they can do for both beneficial and harmful purposes without having to covenant with the devil.
We got to learn about Ireland's only large witch hunt, the Island McGee witch trials of 1711. They saw accusations against 8 women and 1 man. The only other early modern witch trial in Ireland was the trial of Florence Newton in 1661.
Dr. Andrew Snedden, who taught us about Ireland's low number of witch trials, including the Island McGee witch trials and the trial of Florence Newton, he's one of the experts who created a very innovative multimedia museum exhibit that also has a virtual reality component, has elements incorporating the arts. There's a video game, there's a graphic novel. There's a lot associated with this. They tried to use basically every form of media that there is to tell the story of the Island McGee witch trials. And so, highly recommend that you go look at that if you have a chance.
There's a project website you can check out. It's w1711.org. And you can even view original documents from those witch trials.
Our trip through the story of witch hunting took us to France and Spain when we spoke with Dr. Jan Makielsen about witch trials in the Basque Country.
Many colorful accounts of witches' Sabbaths emerged from the accuser's testimonies in that witch hunt, with quite lurid, graphic, and frankly, bizarre details, including the belief that witches would dig up the corpses of their confederates and take them to the Sabbath. There, the devil provided special dentures, which enabled the witches to eat the bodies.
I just love that little detail, the dentures. I mean, who comes up with this stuff? Early modern theologians, scholars, and magistrates actually debated whether the witch's Sabbath was a physical reality or just an illusion created by Satan. They didn't weren't debating whether it was real or not. They just wanted to know in which reality did it exist.
From the Basque Country, we have made the short journey over to Portugal with Dr. Inez Tadu to discuss a more modern witchcraft accusation, which resulted in a horrible crime, the burning of Armida de Jesus in 1933.
Yeah, that discussion taught us a great deal about how witchcraft beliefs have endured through the centuries since Europe's formal witch trials ended. We've also been to Belgium in more modern times with Dr. Christoph Smers, who told us about lay exorcisms of the 18th and 19th centuries.
And another exorcism conversation we had was with Dr. Francis Young, and we know that they're not uncommon in Europe today.
From other discussions, we've learned that witchcraft accusations continue in Europe too.
Indeed, people continue to be attacked and killed due to the fear of witchcraft, the fear of demon possession. We've learned about spiritual and ritual abuse cases in the United Kingdom in our conversations with Jordan Alexander and Kirsty Brimelow, KC.
Those conversations have featured very harrowing tales of shocking violence committed in the United Kingdom in the 21st century against very innocent people, including children. The murder of Victoria Colombier, a young English girl who was accused of witchcraft, and the ritual sacrifice of the boy known only as Adam, whose torso washed up on the banks of the Thames River in London, bring home the point that witch hunts and other harmful practices occur all over the world.
One of the things that we've been reiterating throughout this story during this series of Ending Witch Hunts is the innocence of the victims. And when we look back at the historical victims, many of them are still in a convicted status. They've never had their names cleared. The authority of their community have never cleared their names. And you may have heard of some of these campaigns across the world. These campaigns are working to clear the names of those who are historical witch hunt victims. In several of our episodes, we've had the opportunity to talk with leaders of those campaigns, the Witches of Scotland, who have a podcast you may be familiar with. We did a episode with them. Please check that out, learn a little bit more about their campaign. And Josh, why don't you tell us about the Justice for Witches campaign?
The campaign, which was started by Charlotte Meredith, who we met at a conference in England last year and have had the good fortune to have many discussions with since then. That campaign is seeking a pardon for anybody accused of witchcraft in Scotland, Wales, or England under the Witchcraft Acts of Scotland and England. So anybody in those countries who's been convicted, that campaign is seeking justice for all of them. We have a great affinity with these campaign leaders because we've also been involved in seeking exonerations for people convicted of witchcraft in the American colonies. So we were part of the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project, which did successfully see legislation passed in May 2023 to clear the names of 33 individuals who were indicted or convicted for witchcraft in the Connecticut and New Haven colonies. And currently, there's an exoneration effort that we're supporting out of Maryland.
Because the Maryland effort is in play right now, we actually could use your support with your signature on the petition. It's really easy. You can sign your name to clear their names. And that petition is change.org/MD witch trials. That's change.org/MD for Maryland witch trials.
And an exoneration effort is also underway in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project is currently seeking exoneration for 8 individuals who were convicted of witchcraft in Boston in the years before Salem. So these are individuals who've not been included in the Massachusetts resolutions that have gone through so far, which have cleared the names of all individuals who were convicted during the Salem trials. And this legislation is due to go before the Judicial Committee at a date to be determined. But you can support this one by going to change.org/witch trials.
We've called back to a lot of previous episodes, but did you know this podcast started because we wanted to seek exoneration for the accused witches of Connecticut? So if you go back to the beginning of our podcast, you'll learn all about why exoneration is important and what we were saying about it before the success of the exoneration.
Yeah, we believe really strongly in the importance of justice for the victims of historical witch trials. One reason is, as Dr. Leo Igwe stated in our Africa episode a few days ago, exonerations and pardons send signals around the world that witch hunting is wrong and not something to be tolerated.
There's a few arguments that I hear when people are surprised that such a bill would be brought to the floor right now. And one is that's long gone. That history is over. Those people, that's old history. And I really hope that you're understanding that these exonerations and pardons are really critical until we stop looking for witches and accusing innocent people of witchcraft. It matters to them. Remember when we started this story series, we said the witch hunting story is bigger than just Salem. Pull back each layer of that story and you find out that witch hunts aren't a tall tale. They aren't an open and shut case.
Right. We said 1 minute you think you know the truth.
But then the next minute you realize you don't know the half of it.
And we talked about how life is not black and white, and witch hunts are proof of that because they're not just historical events, they're still happening today.
Throughout the series, we've explored witch hunts in Africa, India, Papua New Guinea, and now we're bringing the story full circle to Europe. And tomorrow, on the last episode of the series, the Americas, where most people think witch hunts are just history.
The uncomfortable truth is that while the form has changed, the fear remains. Even here in the West, we see modern manifestations through homemade exorcisms that go wrong and other ritual abuse cases.
Remember Boris Gershman's research? He analyzed data across 95 countries and found that approximately 40% of people globally believe in harmful witchcraft.
And while the prevalence ranges from 9% in Sweden to 90% in Tunisia, we can't ignore that 16% of Americans, that's nearly 1 in 6, believe in the power of harmful witchcraft.
That is belief in curses, the evil eye, or the ability for spells to cause actual harm. When fear takes over, it leads to dangerous action.
And as we've seen throughout history in Europe's witch trials, and even in modern cases in the UK and the US, there's a line where acting on these beliefs harms innocent people.
The UN Human Rights Report from 2023 confirmed what we've seen across cultures. Victims are often persons in vulnerable situations, including women, children, persons with disabilities, older persons, persons with albinism, and persons with dementia.
So while many might think European and American witch hunts ended centuries ago, we're seeing that the same underlying fears and accusations continue today, just in different forms.
By connecting these dots from historical witch trials to the modern spiritual abuse cases, we can better understand how to end witch hunts everywhere. And this is why our podcast exists. This is why End Witch Hunts, our nonprofit, exists. There's lots to educate on, and there are lots of experts to talk to, and there are lots of innocent people counting on us. Please consider giving us a donation to help us fund our podcasts and to keep developing our projects. We're so glad you joined us for the series. Remember, our podcasthon finishes tomorrow when we look at witch hunting in the Americas.
So be sure to tune in tomorrow. And we've also highlighted a number of episodes on Europe in the show notes so that you can get to those easily. So give those a listen.
Thank you for joining our Fabumendous Podcasthon extravaganza.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.